There is something the narcissist does in the very beginning that most people never notice until they look back. They don't choose their targets randomly. They don't stumble into relationships with super empaths by accident. There is a selection process happening, and it is far more calculated than it appears on the surface. The narcissist is drawn to emotional depth the way a predator is drawn to stillness. They can sense it. They pick up on the person in the room who listens more than they speak, the one who notices when someone else is uncomfortable, the one who will give you the benefit of the doubt even when the evidence says otherwise. To most people, these are simply kind traits. To the narcissist, they are something else entirely. They are openings. Because here is what the narcissist understands. Even if they can't articulate it consciously, a person with deep empathy will always try to understand before they judge. They will always look for the pain behind the behavior. They will always ask themselves what they might have done wrong before they point the finger outward. And to someone who operates through manipulation, that kind of person is the ideal target, not because they are weak, but because their strength is rooted in compassion, and compassion can be exploited. The super empath, in the early stages, does what they always do. They feel into the relationship deeply. They give fully. They see the wounded person beneath the narcissist's surface, and they respond to that wound with everything they have. They offer patience when patience is being used against them. They offer understanding when that understanding is being weaponized. They stay when leaving would have been the wiser choice, not because they are naive, but because they genuinely believe in people. They genuinely believe that love, offered consistently and honestly, can reach someone. This is not stupidity. Let that be clear. This is one of the rarest and most profound capacities a human being can possess. The ability to hold space for another person's pain without collapsing under it. But the narcissist does not see it that way. The narcissist looks at this depth of giving and draws a completely different conclusion. They think, this person will not leave. This person will keep trying. This person will absorb whatever I give them and come back asking how they can do better. And so they push. They test the edges. They pull back affection and watch the super empath work harder to earn it back. They create confusion and watch them search for clarity. They manufacture small betrayals to see how much the bond can hold. And here is the miscalculation, the one that will cost them everything. They mistake the super empath's endurance for limitlessness. They look at someone who keeps showing up through the pain and conclude that the pain has no make. In fact, they see someone who keeps choosing the relationship and assume that the relationship will always be chosen, no matter what. They confuse loyalty with unconditional tolerance. And those are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. What the narcissist fails to understand is that the super empath is not enduring the relationship because they don't feel the damage. They are enduring it because they have an extraordinary capacity to hold pain while still functioning, still loving, still hoping. But that capacity is not a permanent resource. It is a reservoir. And reservoirs, no matter how deep, have a bottom. The super empath is feeling everything. Every withdrawal of affection lands. Every lie registers. Every moment of being made to feel inadequate. Every subtle humiliation. Every time their needs were dismissed or their emotions were turned against them. It is all being recorded, somewhere deep inside them. Not with bitterness, not yet, but with a quiet, accumulating awareness that something here is fundamentally wrong. They don't leave immediately, because they are not built for impulsive decisions. They process, they reflect, they give chances, sometimes too many. But they are also, and this is what the narcissist never accounts for, they are also learning. Every cycle of manipulation teaches them something about how this person operates. Every broken promise shows them what words from this person actually mean. Every time the mask slips, even slightly, the super empath subconscious is filing it away. So when the betrayal finally comes, the one that crosses the line that cannot be uncrossed, the super empath does not shatter the way the narcissist expects. They don't collapse in the way that would make the narcissist feel powerful. Instead, something else happens. Something quieter and far more permanent. They become clear, and clarity, in a super empath, is not the beginning of an argument. It is not the beginning of a fight, or a confrontation, or a dramatic exit. It is the beginning of a departure so complete, so final, that the narcissist will spend years trying to understand how someone who loved them that deeply could become someone they can no longer reach at all. The miscalculation wasn't just tactical. It was total. They didn't just lose a partner. They lost the one person who actually saw them and chose to walk away anyway. Most people assume that when someone is deeply betrayed, the most visible reaction is the most significant one. The crying, the confrontation, the desperate attempts to make sense of what happened. And while those things are real, they are not where the most important transformation is taking place. The real shift, the one that changes everything, happens in a layer of the self that is almost completely invisible from the outside. When a super empath is betrayed at a deep level, something begins to move inside them that has no dramatic announcement. There is no explosion. There is no moment where they stand up and declare that everything has changed. It is quieter than that, and it is far more profound. The first thing that happens is a kind of internal stillness. Not the stillness of someone who has given up, but the stillness of someone who has finally, fully, seen. The fog that manipulation creates, the constant second-guessing, the endless cycle of hope and disappointment, the exhausting work of trying to make sense of behavior that was never meant to make sense. All of that begins to lift, and what remains underneath it is something the narcissist never intended to create. A person who is no longer confused. Confusion, for the narcissist, is a tool. It keeps the other person inside the dynamic. It keeps them asking questions, seeking answers, returning for clarity that is never actually offered. The super empath, for a long time, was caught in that confusion, not because they were not intelligent, but because they were applying a framework of genuine human connection to a situation that operated on entirely different rules. They kept looking for logic that matched their own inner world. They kept searching for the moment when things would finally make sense. The betrayal ends that search, not gently, but completely. And this is where the psychological shift becomes something remarkable, because the super empath does not just process what happened on the surface level. They don't simply conclude that this person was dishonest, or hurtful, or cruel. They go deeper than that. They go back through the entire relationship with new eyes, and they begin to see the architecture of what was done to them, the patterns, the timing, the specific ways their empathy was used as a lever, the moments they now recognize as deliberate, that they once believed were accidental. This is not rumination. It is reconstruction, and it produces something that cannot be undone, a depth of self-knowledge that the betrayal itself created. They now understand not just what happened, but how it happened, and why it was able to happen. They understand their own tendencies, the ones that were targeted, their capacity to see the best in people, their willingness to absorb pain rather than create conflict, their instinct to stay, to try, to believe. They do not abandon these qualities, but they begin to understand them in a completely different way. There is also something that happens to the nervous system of a super empath after deep betrayal that goes largely unspoken. For the duration of the relationship, there was a constant low-level state of tension, the hypervigilance that forms when you are in an environment that is unpredictable, the emotional labor of managing another person's moods, of reading the atmosphere before speaking, of calibrating your own behavior to avoid triggering a reaction. This is exhausting in a way that is difficult to fully articulate, because so much of it happens beneath conscious awareness. When the betrayal lands and the super empath begins to detach, that tension slowly starts to dissolve, and what they feel in its place is something they had almost forgotten, themselves, their own thoughts, without the constant noise of managing someone else's reality, their own emotional responses, without the immediate question of how those responses will be received or used, a return to their own interior world, which is rich and deep, and had simply been occupied for far too long by someone who did not deserve the space. This return to self is not celebrated loudly. It does not look like victory from the outside. In fact, from the outside, it may simply look like withdrawal, like sadness, like someone processing loss. And there is loss, real loss, because the super empath genuinely loved, and genuine love always leaves a mark when it ends. But underneath the grief, something is being rebuilt. Something is being reclaimed. A sense of self that was slowly eroded through the relationship is quietly being restored. And as that restoration continues, something else begins to emerge. A kind of inner authority that was not there before. A knowing, a groundedness, a refusal, not aggressive, not announced, but absolutely non-negotiable, to ever again abandon themselves, for someone who was never willing to meet them honestly. The narcissist created an enemy they never meant to make, a version of the super empath, who now understands, at a cellular level, exactly what they are capable of. There is a moment that arrives in the life of every super empath that does not come with a warning. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive after a dramatic confrontation, or a long conversation, or a final argument that settles everything. It arrives in silence, in stillness, often in an ordinary moment, sitting alone, or waking up in the morning, or simply pausing in the middle of a day that looks exactly like every other day. And in that moment, something shifts so completely that nothing after it will ever look the same. They stop waiting for the apology. That might sound small, but for someone who has invested everything into a relationship, who has given their emotional depth, their patience, their loyalty, their time, their understanding, the act of waiting for acknowledgement is not a passive thing. It is an ongoing expenditure of energy. Every day that they hope the other person will finally see what they did, finally take responsibility, finally offer something real, that hope costs something. It keeps them tethered. It keeps one part of them still inside the relationship, still oriented toward the person who hurt them, still organized around the possibility of repair. When a super empath stops waiting for that apology, they are not simply giving up on receiving one. They are doing something far more significant. They are withdrawing the last remaining piece of themselves that was still being held hostage by the relationship. They are reclaiming the part of their energy that was still, quietly, facing in the direction of someone who never deserved that level of attention in the first place. This is what the narcissist never anticipates. They expect anger. They can work with anger. Anger means the other person is still emotionally activated, still reacting, still in some way connected to them. Even hatred is a form of connection. It requires constant thought of the other person to sustain itself. What the narcissist cannot work with, what genuinely unsettles them at a level they often cannot name, is indifference. Not performed indifference, not the cold shoulder given in hopes of provoking a reaction, but the real thing, the quiet, settled, unshakable indifference of someone who has fully released the need for anything from you. When the super empath reaches this place, they stop explaining themselves to the narcissist. And this is significant because the need to explain, to be understood, to be seen accurately, to correct the false narrative, had been one of the most persistent hooks keeping them engaged. The narcissist is skilled at distorting reality, at rewriting events, at positioning themselves as the victim, and the super empath as the problem. And for a long time, the super empath fought against that distortion. They tried to clarify. They tried to present the truth. They tried to make the narcissist see what actually happened. But the moment they stop doing that, the moment they become genuinely unbothered by what the narcissist thinks or says or tells other people, the dynamic collapses entirely. Because the narcissist's power was never in the manipulation itself. It was in the super empath's response to the manipulation. Remove the response, and there is nothing left to sustain the dynamic. What happens in the super empath's interior world during this transition is worth understanding clearly. They do not become hard. They do not become cold. They do not turn into someone who no longer feels deeply, or loves openly, or leads with empathy. Those qualities are not erased by betrayal. They are redirected. The enormous emotional capacity that was once poured into trying to reach someone who was fundamentally unreachable begins to flow back toward the super empath's own life, their own healing, their own relationships, their own sense of what they deserve and what they will no longer accept. And with that redirection comes a reclamation of power that is unlike anything the super empath has felt in a very long time. Not the aggressive kind of power, not the kind that needs to dominate or retaliate or prove something, but the quiet, stable, deeply personal power of someone who knows exactly who they are and has decided, without ambiguity and without apology, to protect that. They start making decisions from a different place. The chronic second-guessing that the relationship had conditioned into them, the constant checking of whether their feelings were valid, whether their needs were too much, whether they were being too sensitive, begins to fade. In its place is something the narcissist worked very hard to dismantle and ultimately failed to destroy: trust in themselves. They trust their perception again. They trust their instincts. They trust the part of them that knew, long before they were ready to act, that something was deeply wrong. And once a super empath fully reclaims that trust, Once they are no longer available to be redirected, reframed, or pulled back in, they become something the narcissist has no strategy for. They become someone who simply no longer needs anything from them at all. There is something that happens to the narcissist after the super empath leaves that the narcissist is completely unprepared for. Not immediately. In the beginning, they are often dismissive. They tell themselves the story they always tell when a relationship ends, that the other person was too sensitive, too demanding, that they are better off without someone who expected so much. They move quickly, as they usually do, into distraction, new sources of attention, new people to impress, new environments where no one yet knows the version of them that was exposed inside that relationship. But then something begins to happen beneath the surface, quietly, persistently, in the spaces between the distractions, in the late hours, in the unexpected silences, in the moments when the new stimulation fades and they are left alone with themselves. The narcissist begins to feel something they are not equipped to process. They begin to feel the absence, not just of a relationship, not just of someone who was convenient or useful or available, but of something far more specific and far more rare. They begin to feel the absence of someone who actually saw them, fully, including the parts they kept hidden from everyone else. The super empath, in the depth of their empathic capacity, had perceived things about the narcissist that no one else bothered to look for. The wound underneath the arrogance, the fear underneath the control, the profound emptiness that the constant pursuit of admiration was always trying to fill. And rather than recoiling from those things, the super empath had responded with understanding, with patience, with a quality of presence that the narcissist, in all their maneuvering and manipulation, had never been able to manufacture or replace. That kind of witness is not something you find easily. And the narcissist, who spent the entire relationship taking it for granted, begins to understand this only after it is gone. So they come back. Not always dramatically. Sometimes it is subtle, a message that appears casual, designed to seem like an afterthought, a comment that surfaces under old content, a mutual connection who suddenly brings up the narcissist's name in conversation. Sometimes it is more direct, an apology that sounds, on the surface, more genuine than anything offered during the relationship itself, a declaration that they have changed, that they have been doing the inner work, that they now see what they had and what they threw away. And here is where understanding the psychology becomes essential, because the return of the narcissist is almost never what it presents itself as. It is rarely about genuine remorse. Genuine remorse requires the capacity to hold another person's pain as real and significant, to feel it, not just intellectually acknowledge it. What the narcissist experiences is not remorse in that deep sense. What they experience is need. The supply they moved on to does not compare. The new connections lack the depth they became accustomed to. The quality of attention they once received, attentive, emotionally intelligent, deeply felt, is not something they are finding elsewhere, and so they return to the source. There is also something more specific happening psychologically. The narcissist's identity is heavily constructed through the reactions of other people. They require a particular kind of response from their environment to maintain their internal sense of self. The super empath, for a long time, provided a very high quality of that response, not through compliance, but through genuine engagement. Even when the super empath pushed back, even when they expressed hurt or asked for more, there was substance in those interactions. There was real emotional content. And the narcissist, moving through the world after the relationship, begins to notice the difference between that and the hollow versions of connection they are able to sustain with people who do not see as deeply. The pull they feel is not love in any complete sense of the word, but it is real. It is a gravitational draw towards something they damaged and lost and cannot fully replicate. And so they reach back. They test the edges. They look for the opening that they are convinced must still be there, because someone who loved that deeply cannot simply have stopped. What they do not understand, what they fundamentally underestimate, is that the super empath, return to themselves, has been total. The version of the super empath who waited, who hoped, who absorbed and endured and tried, that version completed its purpose and was left behind. What exists now is someone who understands the pull they feel, sees it clearly for what it is, and is no longer moved by it. The narcissist reaches back, expecting to find a door that is still open. What they find instead is a wall so quiet, so settled, so completely without anger or desperation, that it stops them entirely. They finally understand what they had, the moment it becomes permanently unavailable to them. There is a version of this story that most people expect. They expect the super empath to rise through anger, to win through exposure, to find their power in making the narcissist pay for what was done to them. It is a satisfying narrative, the wronged person becoming formidable, the betrayer facing consequences, justice arriving in a visible and dramatic form. But that is not what actually happens in the deepest cases of transformation. And it is not where the super empath's greatest victory is found. The real victory is quieter than that, and it is so complete that the narcissist has no response to it. When a super empath has fully moved through betrayal, not around it, not over it, but genuinely through it, they arrive at a place that is difficult to describe from the outside because it does not look like what most people associate with winning. There is no performance of strength. There is no need to be seen as healed or powerful or unbothered. There is simply a person who has returned so fully to themselves that the entire architecture of the narcissist's influence, the self-doubt that was carefully installed, the dependency that was deliberately constructed, the diminished sense of worth that was methodically reinforced, has been dismantled from the inside out. This is not something the narcissist can compete with, because everything they used to maintain control required the super empath to remain, on some level, reachable. The manipulation required a mind that could be confused. The emotional withdrawal required a heart that would chase the warmth when it disappeared. The gaslighting required a person who was still uncertain enough about their own perception to be redirected. Once the super empath has moved beyond all of that, once their mind is clear, their heart is protected by genuine wisdom rather than walls, and their perception is no longer available to be overwritten. There is simply nothing left for the narcissist to work with. And this is when the super empath becomes, in the most precise psychological sense, unreachable, not cold, not damaged, not hardened into someone who no longer feels, or trusts, or connects. That would not be victory. That would be a different kind of loss. A loss of the very qualities that made them who they are. The super empath who has truly healed does not become less empathic. They become more precise with their empathy. They still feel deeply. They still perceive the emotional undercurrents in every room they enter. They still have the capacity to hold space for another person's pain with a quality of presence that is genuinely rare, but they are no longer available to be entered through those qualities. The door that manipulation once used has been understood so completely that it no longer functions as an entrance. There is something else that happens at this stage that carries its own particular power. The super empath stops organizing any part of their life around the narcissist narrative. During the relationship, and often for some time after it ends, there is an invisible, gravitational pull toward the story the narcissist constructed about who the super empath is, what they deserve, where they failed, what they should have been. Even after leaving, that narrative can continue to shape decisions, limit choices, distort self-perception. Healing, at the deepest level, means dismantling that narrative entirely, not replacing it with an angry counter-narrative, but releasing it, returning to a self-understanding that was formed from the inside rather than imposed from the inside. When that happens, the super empath begins to move through the world differently, not with the heaviness of someone carrying unresolved pain, not with the hypervigilance of someone still waiting to be heard again, but with a groundedness, a self-possession, a quiet confidence that comes specifically from having survived something that was designed to break them, and having emerged from it more suddenly, themselves, than they were before it began. This is what becomes the narcissist's greatest regret, not the loss of control, not the absence of someone to manipulate, but the dawning, irreversible understanding that they had access to one of the rarest things a human being can offer another, a love that was deep, intelligent, patient, and real, and they used it as a resource rather than honoring it as a gift. They had someone who saw their darkness and chose to stay anyway, someone who understood their wound and tried to meet it with genuine care. And rather than recognizing what that was, they weaponized it. They pushed it until it was gone. The super empath does not need them to understand this. That is the final and most profound expression of their freedom, the complete absence of any need for the narcissist to see, acknowledge, or validate what was lost. They already know what they are worth, and that knowledge belongs to them alone, permanently, beyond anyone's power to take it away. There is something that separates the final departure of an empath from every previous moment they considered leaving. And understanding that difference matters, because on the surface, it can look the same. They have threatened to leave before. They have packed bags mentally, rehearsed conversations, stood at the edge of the decision and pulled back. They have had moments of absolute clarity, where they saw the relationship for exactly what it was, and felt certain they were done. And then something shifted. The narcissist offered something, a softening, a moment of apparent vulnerability, a return of the warmth that existed in the beginning, and the empath, whose entire nature is oriented toward connection and repair, stepped back from the edge. This cycle is not weakness. That needs to be said clearly and without judgment. The empath did not stay because they were foolish, or blind, or incapable of seeing what was happening. They stayed because leaving someone you love, even someone who is hurting you, requires a specific kind of readiness that cannot be forced or rushed. It has to be reached, and the process of reaching it is not linear. It does not build steadily toward a single clean moment of decision. It moves in waves. It deepens through repetition. Every time the empath returned and the same patterns reasserted themselves, something was being confirmed at a level deeper than conscious thought. The evidence was accumulating not just in their mind, but in their body, in their nervous system, in the part of them that registers truth before the rational mind catches up. So when the final departure comes, it does not come because something new happened. It rarely does. It comes because something internal reached completion. A threshold was crossed, not dramatically, not always in response to the worst thing the narcissist ever did, but quietly, in a moment that may have looked ordinary from the outside. The empath simply arrived at a place where the version of themselves that was willing to keep trying no longer existed. Not because it was destroyed, but because it had finally been fully heard, fully honored, and fully released. This is what makes the final departure categorically different from every near departure that preceded it. Before, there was always a remainder, a part of the empath that was still hoping, still oriented toward the possibility of change, still holding a version of the relationship they believed could exist if only the right things shifted. That remainder was the opening the narcissist always found their way back through, not because they were skilled at detecting it, though they were, but because the empath themselves had not yet finished with hope. And you cannot fully leave something you have not finished hoping for. When the empath finally walks away for the last time, that remainder is gone, not suppressed, not hidden beneath pain or anger or exhaustion, actually gone, resolved at a depth that does not reverse. And this changes the entire character of the decision. It is no longer a choice being made against the pull of feeling. It is a choice that is completely aligned with feeling, because the feeling itself has shifted. The love did not disappear entirely, because genuine love does not simply vanish, but it is no longer organized around the other person. It has turned back toward the self. And love, when it turns back toward the self in someone who has spent years directing it outward, becomes something extraordinarily powerful. The narcissist senses this difference, even if they cannot name it. There is something in the quality of the empath's departure that does not feel like the previous ones. There is no residue of desperation, no lingering opening in the energy. The empath is not leaving in a way that invites being followed. They are leaving in the way that people leave when they have genuinely finished. And the narcissist, who built their entire strategy around the empath's capacity to return, suddenly finds that the strategy has no ground to stand on. What is also significant is what the empath is not doing in this moment. They are not leaving to make a point. They are not leaving to provoke a reaction or to finally be chased in the way they deserve to be, valued all along. They are not leaving with a speech prepared or a need to be witnessed in their departure. The absence of those needs is itself the evidence of how complete the internal shift has been. They are leaving because staying has become something they are no longer willing to do. Not out of anger, not out of defeat, but out of a clear, settled, unambiguous respect for themselves. That kind of leaving cannot be argued with. It cannot be manipulated, love-bombed, or reframed into something the empath might reconsider. It is not a position they are holding. It is a place they have arrived at. And from that place, they do not look back. Not because the past didn't matter, but because they finally matter more.